Hello, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is July 18th today, and we are going to be talking about a few astrological events that are taking place right now, as well as talking about the eclipse that's coming next week. So today and tomorrow, the moon is in Libra, and it's making a first quarter square with the sun in the sign of Cancer. So it's first quarter moon time right now. And first quarter moon every month is always, an event to pay attention to. It may not be the most noticeable astrological event every month, but first quarter moons, full moons, last quarter moons, and new moons, always important, especially during eclipse season. Right now, the first quarter moon that we're going through is essentially happening between our solar eclipse that just happened in Cancer opposite Pluto and the full moon lunar eclipse, which is coming through on the 27th, and that is forming a conjunction with Mars retrograde. So when you're at a first quarter moon in the midst of back-to-back eclipses, back-to-back-to-back eclipses, if you count the August 11th eclipse, which will be another solar eclipse following the lunar eclipse that's coming next week, then, every aspect of the moon cycle matters, and every aspect has something to say, especially the hard aspects, because you're in the midst of a particularly charged period of the year and a particularly intense moment within the moon cycle. Now, sometimes these changes are really gross and sometimes they're more subtle, but to me, they stand out right now for a variety of reasons that we'll talk about. Next to talking about the first quarter moon that's coming through right now, we also want to take a look at the big event, which is Mars conjoining the south node of the moon very closely right now. Now, I use the mean node. Some people use the true node. There are different reasons that one might use either node. It's very closely conjoined the south node of the moon using the mean node today, in fact. So that we should also talk about. And then say a few things about what to expect from the upcoming eclipse, the lunar eclipse happening again next week on the 27th. So that's our agenda for today. If you have any additional questions or anything that you'd like me to try to address within the flow of today's talk, then feel free to just put that right into the chat box. So first quarter moon, let's start with that. So the first quarter moon today and into tomorrow, I count, just in case those of you technical astrology geeks out there like myself, if you count sort of more technically, then you might think of the any moon I count as occurring as soon as the moon enters the sign within which it will form the aspect. So for example, the first quarter moon is technically not taking place until the moon reaches about 27 degrees of Libra and squares the sun at 27 degrees of Cancer, which is happening about 4:25 Eastern time tomorrow afternoon. And so, but I begin counting the last quarter moon period as soon as the moon enters Libra, which was yesterday. So if we go back, let's see, I can give you the exact time. Entered about 4 in the afternoon, 4:30ish yesterday. So the orb of the moon, whether you're a first quarter or a full moon or whatever, usually I give it a couple of days, because think about it like this. This is a simple way of thinking about moon aspects. If you were to really go nuts and have just a kind of crazy psychological, like meltdown, like you become a lunatic. Of course, the word lunatic comes from the moon, the name for the moon, Luna. So, but does that happen? Let's say it's under the full moon that you just go a little mad for a little bit. Does that happen at the exact moment of the full moon? Maybe sometimes, but I worked actually at a residence home for schizophrenic adults in New York City. And when the full moon periods came through, and you'd often see mental health decompensations, meaning a person might have an episode of some kind. They would happen often around the full moons, but sometimes the morning of, or sometimes the morning after, or sometimes the afternoon of. So there's a wide sort of orb, an umbrella of time around the moon's movements, because the moon is gestational, it's fluid, it's fast, and because life is not tidy. Life doesn't happen at exactly the moment that you think it's going to happen. For example, the same thing is true with, I know this firsthand right now, women and their due dates in pregnancy, right? It's not, it can come early, so the due date is like, yeah, it's around this time. It's the orb of when it's going to happen. So similarly, the moon in its monthly gestations from one sign to the next, I always track the first quarter moon as soon as it enters the sign where it will make the first quarter moon. Same thing with full or last quarter or new. So at any rate, coming up to the current moment, we're about a day away from the first quarter moon between the moon and the sun, and moon in Libra and sun in Cancer. So what does that mean? How might that apply to us? Something that's important to remember is that this first quarter moon features the Venus-ruled sign of Libra, and it features the lunar or moon-ruled sign of Cancer with the sun. So you have moon-Venus themes getting together right now. For one thing, Venus is debilitated right now. I did a whole video talking about Venus in Virgo, so check that out if you want to hear more about what it means when I say something like Venus is debilitated. But Venus is in a sign that's not exactly comfortable for her right now in Virgo. And there's reasons for that are really fascinating. But it's very important to pay attention to details like that, because, for example, when the sun and the moon square one another, there's often a kind of tension. Squares are of the nature of Mars, so there can be like a kind of confrontational quality to a first quarter moon or a last quarter moon. So one would anticipate, for example, with the moon in Libra, different kinds of Venetian confrontations. Well, what does a Venetian confrontation look like, or what does a Venetian challenge look like? Sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, especially since Venus is a planet of diplomacy, PR, friendliness, getting along with people, harmonizing, love, beauty, etc. Well, this goes along very closely with the Mars retrograde themes, but let's just open CNN, and I want to show you an example of what this means. And I use CNN randomly. It's a website that lots of people know for the news. Top headline on CNN. Here's White House tries to clear up another one-word flap PR problem. Trump didn't mean to say no to a question about Russia targeting U.S. press secretary says. PR problems, right? True. The way that you communicate, running into conflict, it's not PC, it's not beautiful. Trump comes on and tries to correct and he's trying to take back things that he's said, and which is pretty normal for him. But this is like, ever since the moon entered Libra, it was literally, I think, like an hour or so before the moon entered Libra yesterday, he had a press conference trying to basically save face for having, put his foot in his mouth pretty badly at the Helsinki meeting with Putin, right? Okay, but that's not it. Look at this. Papa John's founder says it was a mistake to resign. PR. I shouldn't have done something. A PR snafu. These are Venus things. How does the appear? How does it look? How does it appear? How does it feel? Tucker Carlson's racist attempt to deflect outrage. You can go on. Elon Musk apologizes to cave rescuer. So you've got like that. Or how about this one? Let's see. Where is it? Yeah, there's another one, which was that a major basketball player was traded today, and he went on Instagram just completely lambasting very publicly the way that the NBA is unloyal to its players. So why am I saying all of this? Because again, you have moon in very nice diplomatic sign of Libra, but it's intensified by a square to the sun. And then the dispositor, Venus, is afflicted right now. And so, the possibility for misunderstandings, miscommunications, I didn't mean this, I didn't communicate that right, or I was caught communicating what I really feel and think, and now it looks bad, and so I'm trying to adjust it. You can look at the media and just like literally today's headlines, there's just like, it's just covered with that kind of stuff. And this intensified because we're in the middle of eclipse season that you can see it so clearly. But yeah, so yeah, exactly. Kawhi Leonard trade for DeMar DeRozan, and DeRozan goes online basically saying this is, the NBA has no loyalty, da, 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 da. So all kinds of like bad PR, bad publicity, bad customer relations, like that. In fact, last night I was on the phone with someone for, one of our internet bills provider or whatever. And the customer service was like just awful, but I felt bad because the guy knew it was awful and was like trying to like, basically cover himself and recover from having handled the situation so poorly. And I was just sitting there going like, wow, this is like such a first quarter moon in Libra with Venus debilitated right now. So you can see that pretty clearly. And you could see that in your own lives potentially through different kinds of conflicts or misunderstandings that can come up in emails, in workplace, and communicating with people, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, and Kawhi is threatening to never play for the Raptors. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly the kind of, this is the mood. And of course, Mars retrograde plays into this as well. We can join the South Node, but we'll get to that in a minute. So that's one layer or level. Now, the other thing, though, is that with the moon highlighted, right, and the sun in the moon's sign, and there's also a real emotional current to what's happening right now with this first quarter moon. There's a sense of not only public image, diplomacy, communication snafus, et cetera, but you're also talking about issues that may be very sensitive around, family, race, heredity, culture, like that. So, easily the kinds of communication or the kinds of blunders that can happen right now in relationships may have very deep emotional roots. Why? Because remember, this cycle also started off with a solar eclipse in Cancer, a solar eclipse in the moon sign opposite Pluto. So the kinds of snafus, the kinds of diplomatic binds that one may find oneself in, or the kinds of challenges facing relationships at the moment, they have very deep roots. And so the feeling of there being, you can't fix this one so simply, you can't polish a turd, you know what I mean? Like, so that could be in the air as well, that there's much deeper roots here, whether that traces back to things like, again, race, gender, prejudice, sexual orientation, family drama, family karma. I mean, it gets down to, with the moon sign, you're getting into the sort of the karmic substrata, the stuff we have really deep invested attachments to in this world. So those kinds of things can, the blunders have deeper roots. That's the message there. Now, the other thing is that you have to remember that first quarter moons often in general sort of signify a critical turning point, a critical decision, a moment where you're faced with, you must confront something, or it's a testing period. So yesterday, for example, I wrote that a first quarter moon often calls us to action or presents us with difficult choices or a crossroad within the monthly lunation cycle. They represent a kind of testing period or a period of confrontation and challenge. So just generally speaking, you may be at a moment in this eclipse season where the deeper ramifications of what the eclipses are indicating in your life are taking hold in the form of having to make difficult choices, having to confront things that are unavoidable. They're right before you, can't be avoided anymore. Or whether that's where you're you're at a crossroads. You feel like you have to make a difficult choice or a difficult decision. But in the midst of eclipse season, it's hard to do so. There's a certain kind of paralysis by analysis that can take place, or a feeling of there's too much at stake to try and make a decision right now. I can't weigh the good and bad of it carefully enough, or I can't arrive at a decision. So classically, sometimes Libra moon will struggle with some level of indecision, especially when pitted against the deep sort of heartfelt attachment of the Cancer sun, which is like, I can't make a decision because I have emotional investment in this. I'm torn in different ways for different reasons. So it becomes very challenging to use your rational mind to make a decision when there's so much heart and emotion on board as well. So you also think of the moon in Cancer, and the rulership of the moon over Cancer, I should say, and the idea of emotional intelligence coming to bear on the moon in Libra, which is Libra is an air sign. It's a masculine sign, and although it's Venus ruled, it tends to be more politically correct, sophisticated, elegant, balanced, refined, and mental. It tends to be a little bit more heady. So, like, for example, like moon in Libra could be the beautiful design of an architect, right? And it's classy, it's aesthetic, it's beautiful, but it's geometric, right? It's abstract, it's mathematical, it's perfect in a sense, it's ideal. There is, in a sense, in the world, there is no such thing as perfect balance. Things are going up and down all the time, from the hormones to the fluids in our body to the way that nature moves. So those two realities don't always get along either. The more feminine and fluid and dynamic and changeable emotional atmosphere of Cancer doesn't necessarily get along with the more abstract, rational, sort of ideal environment of Libra. They're both interested in beauty, in harmony, in sort of, you might say, relational or feminine things, but they have two totally different ways of going about it. So the kind of crossroads that we're at right now may also just bring up the challenge between trying to be objective and rational, and what does the best plan look like? How does everything look nice and sort of doable? And on the other hand, you have the moon in Cancer, which is going to make its decisions based more fundamentally on how it feels and what feels to be right, or what one's investment is on a deeper level, reflecting deeper kinds of attachments. So those aren't easy qualities to balance out in the midst of a first quarter moon moment in the middle of eclipse season. It's a very personal and emotional level of change that you could say is in the air right now. And navigating that, intelligently. And what kind of intelligence? There's not just one kind of intelligence. So those are different forces that are at work, you could say, simultaneously. Now, the other thing that is at play in the midst of this first quarter moon moment is the fact that we are approaching a massive lunar eclipse next week. And prior to that happening, the Mars retrograde is very closely conjoining the south node of the moon. So that also plays into what's happening right now in a very powerful way. I want to give you guys an example of this that comes from my practice. I think probably back in June, when Mars was approaching the south node of the moon, you guys probably remember Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain took their own lives. And I talked a lot about the south node of the moon and Mars at that time as a signature of some level of violent renunciation, because the south node is associated with diminishment, constriction, loss, and it's also associated, especially in Indian astrology, with renunciation of worldly things that tends to come through experiences of loss in the material world. For example, when you lose someone to death, it often leads you to refine your material attachments, because you realize that you're focused on or attached to so many things that don't matter, and you could have spent more time with that individual because you had that experience. You reorient yourself to spend more quality time with the people you love. So there's renunciation associated with the South Node, as it is also associated with different forms of material loss or decline. So when you put Mars, planet of violence, planet of hostility, confrontation, the god of war, when you put that energy with the South Node, there can be a sort of violent or extreme form of renunciation. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to take my own life. I reject the world, or I renounce something. And it could maybe not just be your own life, but just renouncing things in life too extremely or whatever. So I talked about all of this back in June. Go back and check out a video that I did called, I think it was called The Astrology of Suicide, something like that. And it was all about, in a sense, it was all about the South Node and Mars. Well, as Mars came back over the South Node, I received an email from a woman who, wanted to be anonymous, but told me that she was feeling supported through my video blog talks after coping with the death of her husband to suicide. And he was apparently, I don't know who he was, but he was a high profile, very public individual. And this was not this year, but some time ago. And that was all she said. And it affected me. It had a very deep impact on me to hear that, because we are but as Mars was coming back through the retrograde, in other words, to the South Node, I received word back from someone. Oftentimes you hear from things that come from the past. I heard back from someone about something that I had talked about that had landed with someone who had a high profile suicide, very publicized suicide of a family member, their husband, in their life. And the message of that video that I believe is worth repeating is that one of the things that I said in that video was that there is no such thing as eternal punishment, only eternal patience. That was a line from that video that I said then, and I'll say it again now. The reason for this is that we have this tendency with Mars on the South Node to want to punish, rebuke, renounce, cut out, eliminate with severity, with a kind of damning quality when Mars conjoins the South Node, especially retrograde, which can signify a very powerful level of frustration or blockage or disappointment or anger. And so we have to be especially careful right now of the desire to try and eliminate or eradicate with a kind of damning quality. Anything, even if it's bad and it truly needs to go, because there is no such thing as eternal punishment, only eternal patience. We will be held accountable in the ongoing life of our soul, which is eternal. We are held accountable. We will go on and experience the need for patience. Why is patience so important? Well, it becomes important as soon as you realize that you are actually an eternal being. Like, what quality would you really need while in the material world, moving from one lifetime to the next, other than patience, right? If you're an eternal being and you can really be here for quite a long time, right? You can really be doing this reincarnational journey for a really long time. So what quality do you need more than patience? Well, if that, you see, that's exactly why a damning attitude doesn't work. And it only perpetuates having to deal with something later, having to face something later. And when you face it later, you will either be forced into a situation where you have to have patience, where you are forced to learn how to have patience, which is challenging, and can be kind of maddening, or you'll just keep trying to avoid the things that are actually calling for your patience. So even when we have to dismiss and get rid of something, even when we have to cut something out, Mars is cutting, Mars is confronting, cutting, eliminating, like that. So even though that spirit of wanting to rid ourselves of something is very strong right now, we have to be careful of the way that we do it. we have to remember that patience with the process. I think about this a lot as a newish parent, right? Something that my wife and I were reflecting on is how much more patient we've grown as human beings, learning that it just doesn't work to try and teach our daughter things without patience. Because if I try to damn or condemn her actions, if that's the mood that I bring to it, if that's the tone of voice that I use when I'm trying to correct or eliminate some kind of bad behavior or whatever, what ends up sticking is the damning tone, the damning quality, and not the actual lesson, not the actual correction or instruction. And so that's very, very important. Similarly, if we want to correct something, we can't just make a superficial bid to eliminate something. We must really confront it. So let's go back to the news today. White House tries to clear up another one-word flap, right? Clear up another one-word flap, right? Or Papa John's founder says it was a mistake to resign, etc. Or why the U.S. is obligated to defend Montenegro. There are all sorts of things being issued right now about why you shouldn't do something, why you should correct something, why that was bad, why that was evil, why that was like this, you must correct it. And the important thing to note with all of that is that an attempt to correct something that is full of bluster and bravado and is well, it's like, one of the things that came out during the Me Too movement that I paid attention to was in the beginning when the Me Too movement came out, sometimes there were men who tried to rush into the center stage and make it all about themselves, saying like, I've been an offender, I've been so bad, I've been so miserable, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the main responses to that was, that's just a lot of hot air. If you really feel bad, you'll listen. And if you really feel bad, you won't make it about yourself. And if you really feel bad, you'll make an effort to change the pattern or behavior at its roots. There is no simple, quick PR cleanup that can be done in our lives or in the greater world without deeper, authentic levels of change that are really happening, that have to really happen. So similarly, Mars retrograde on the South Node can, they can be about the sort of flat attempt to correct something, the sort of lip service that we give to needing to address something, the ineffectual attempt to address something that's really nothing more than a show of bravado, and that doesn't really reflect true listening or true change. So you can go to extremes. You can have the damning quality, the eliminating quality, the harsh, severe, rid myself of that quality with Mars retrograde on the South Node, or you can have the bluster and the bravado. I'm going to change it. It was, like that. So I'll fix it. I'll make it better. I'm a hero of change or something like that. I can't tell you how many times I'll scroll through social media, and I don't mean to blast anyone or don't mean to be overly general here, but I'll see people offering elaborate confessionals, online about, things they need to clear the air about, things they want to confront, things that they want to deal with or what have you. And the thing that I notice is that sometimes the same exact people will be posting the same kinds of declarative statements about how it's time to change, or it's time to purge, or it's time to heal, or it's time to grow over and over and over and over. And when I grew up, that was called, like your weekly baptism at church. And you saw the same people essentially going up for altar call every single week to get saved all over again. Like, how many times do you need to be saved before you sort of button your lip and kind of get down to the business of doing your inner work and doing it in a way that's humble and modest and not drawing so much attention to itself? So that's important right now too. But on the other hand, you also don't want to be so stoic or so, so, again, it gets close to that tone or that mood of the kind of austere slave driver inside. Like I'm cracking the whip on myself, and I'm inwardly I'm punishing myself. I'm whipping myself into shape. So the quality of taking the Mars energy and pushing it inward into yourself and just attacking yourself inwardly, you want to be careful of that as well. So the extremes of the Mars going in either direction, the public declarations of change and the public confessionals and all of this, but on the other hand, the tendency to beat yourself up in a deep, austere, sort of inward place that nobody can see, and to be cruel to oneself on an inner level. Those are all possibilities with Mars retrograde, but Mars retrograde on the South Node can intensify all of that because of the spirit of diminishment, decline, constriction. South Node is Saturnine, and also the association with renouncing things that comes with the South Node. So we're at about half an hour in. I'm going to check up and see if there's any questions so far before I keep going. I say what I mean until I don't mean it anymore. Want to make something of it? Ross says, yeah, that's perfect. That's it right there. That's funny. There's a lot of people, Mike says, spare the rod and spoil the child. Agree or disagree? I would say spoil the rod and spare the child. I don't know. There's a lot of people, Mike says, excusing every type of destructive behavior in the name of compassion. Yeah, obviously that could be an issue where, there can be a kind of like an ability to turn a blind eye toward the suffering of the world or the need for change in the world out of a spirit of renunciation, like to renounce the world, like I'm not going to be involved, like the world is just an ineffective mess and I have nothing to do with it and I don't want to be involved with any of it, and you kind of have a damning attitude toward the world, and that can certainly be generated at this time. I mean, you could see that, but my sense is that we have to be careful because compassion is, to me anyway, compassion is a very radical position to take. It's not effectively, if compassion is not dismissive in its attitude. To me, compassion is not about condoning things that are bad or destructive, but it is also not about condemning things that are bad or destructive, and that the balance that takes in heart and the firmness to hold that balance that it takes is like learning to hold a very difficult balancing posture in yoga. You have to have a lot of core strength and a lot of balance to be able to hold, or core strength and a lot of firmness in your position to be able to hold a very delicate balancing posture. And so to be compassionate without condoning, to be compassionate without condemning, I feel is not, compassion is not a pushover kind of position. It's very difficult to figure out how to stay in the compassionate space of mind, how to be intelligent, discerning, discriminating, strong, but also not seeking to damage or harm that which we see as harmful, because it only cycles us into something. And that's all part of this. The very fact that you bring that question up, the very fact that I'm sitting here trying to address it like all sensitively, this is part of the dilemma between the moon in Libra square the sun in Cancer in the midst of this eclipse season, while Mars is on the South Node. It's very easy right now to how can you say it? It's very easy to be triggered at a very deep level right now by what may feel like superficial things. For example, go back to CNN. As I was saying this earlier when we started the talk. Diplomatic snafus can be, they have much deeper roots than they. It's not just a one-word flap that needs to be cleared up. And why is there so much outrage, and why is there so much immediate hypersensitive diligence to clear up one word? It's because it's not one word. You know what I mean? It's not one word. It's not a misspeak. It was a revelation. You can't take it back. You can't, like I said earlier, you can't polish a turd. So that the diplomatic problems that we may face right now are requiring a much deeper and more authentic and sensitive level of response. And, you know, some people are absolutely not going to be capable of that. You can easily see with Mars in the South Node doubling down into a very defiant position. Well, I'm the outsider. Well, I'm not understood. Well, my position is right. Well, this thing is wrong. Well, that thing is bad. You know, like just the Mars South Node energy is a bit like a Mars-Saturn conjunction in the sense that it rigidifies the Mars. And the Mars is already frustrated trying to sort of figure out what's going on through its retrogradation, trying to redo things. So there's that sensitivities in the air like that right now. So Brian says, leaving toxic friendship with draining Scorpio friend, had physical symptoms of stress, inflammation, don't want to cause her more pain, but feel afraid of her reaction no matter how gracefully I try to explain my exit. Perfect example. It's no easy way out. You know what I mean? There's no easy, and this is the important thing. There's never an easy way out when you consider the scope of eternity, when you consider the idea that all of us beings are eternal spirit souls with we don't have a beginning and an ending. So building this kind of patience, this kind of tolerance, this kind of respect and compassion for one another, the intelligence needed to work those things, and the temptation of flushing it all or damning it all or whatever, that's what's at stake right now. In a lot of ways, that's the energy that's being brought up for all of us. And yet we have to remember the eternal scope of our nature. Patience accompanies eternity. Eternity has to be patient. You know, it has all the time in the world. So, okay. So in terms of preparing for next week's eclipse, this will be the last thing that we say. Next week's eclipse is happening on the 27th. It's a full lunar eclipse conjoined with Mars retrograde. Doesn't get much more intense than that. Look at the Aquarius ruled house in your chart. Look at the whole sign house of Aquarius, or look at about 4 degrees of Aquarius in your chart. And remember that, you know, any lunar eclipse brings a feeling of culmination. And as one of my teachers, Rebecca Gordon, likes to say, a door is closing in your life. And so you can think about culmination, completion, closure, but not without the frustration, the culmination, the pain, the suffering, the intensity, the difficulty or the challenge of Mars passing through the moon, Mars confronting the vulnerable moon, and especially in Aquarius, where we're already often dealing with themes of being an outsider, or feeling like something is marginalized, or something hasn't been given its fair due, or feeling rejected or outcast, or on the outskirts somehow. This kind of energy with Mars retrograde and the lunar eclipse can be a very powerful level of confrontation, especially in a more vulnerable place. It's very easy to also dissociate, to just, again, to want to cut something out, to want to try to eliminate with a kind of cold-hearted, cerebral, or rational quality. So you have to be really careful to stay in our hearts, to stay human with one another throughout the next weeks ahead. Another thing that I'll just mention with the lunar eclipse is that you have, I was talking to my friend Rebecca about this yesterday. Rebecca Gordon, she wrote a medical astrology book, and she's been on the Dr. Oz program a bunch. And one thing that she was saying when I was talking to her briefly on the phone yesterday was, she was saying, you know, Aquarius also rules the circulatory system. So we were talking about different, you know, things that could be indicated with regard to this eclipse. Medically, you want to be careful of things that, first of all, the circulatory system in general could be indicated, or the nervous system, sometimes things that air signs are related to. You think about the ankles when you think about Aquarius sometimes as well. But you also think about, with Mars, you think about, burning, cutting, hot things, agitation, things getting inflamed, and then the mixture of the cold and hot. This is the Aquarius is an air sign related to the winds in the body, the relationship of the sort of the sort of like the in yoga, like the different kinds of sort of airs, or what's the word I'm looking for? The vayus, I believe it is. But anyway, you have different levels of circulatory sort of air and blood moving through the body. And so you want to be especially careful of the way that, more intense mental or rational dynamics can actually manifest more explosively and more potentially violently, or in a way that harms oneself or others. So you think of the connection between the nervous system, the mind, the speech, and then the intensity and sort of sharpness of Mars. And you just want to be very careful to avoid conflicts, arguments, debates, like getting into it with people. Be careful about getting overly involved with social media, fights with people, or putting out really controversial, edgy statements that are, that really are just like a lot of the times we punch something out into social media, and it's literally like a punch. We don't even realize that our real intention is to just punch a few people in the face that we don't like. We're just using our words to do it. We don't know who they are, but we hope it'll land somewhere. We get satisfied by the sense that our opinion, or something we feel self-righteous about, we put it out there, it lands a punch somewhere, and we feel good about that. And we shouldn't feel good about hitting people with our opinions, no matter how right we feel they might be. Sometimes I hear people say, Democrats or liberal-minded people in our country need to do more than just hope. You've probably heard this before, and progressive, politically minded people are soft, and our opponents on the right are they're strong, and they're not afraid to take out their brass knuckles or whatever. And we're just like citizens of hope. We just hope that something good will happen, or something like that. And while there's definitely something to that, there can be a certain kind of passivity, like we're in a liberal arts classroom and it's just time for someone with a really bad opinion to speak for a while, and then once they're done, we'll just talk about how bad of an idea that was behind their back, and then wait till we can dominate the conversation again. Like that, like maybe that's a picture of how liberals sometimes conceive of their role in politics and shaping the dialogue nationally or something. And it's too passive. That could be a part of this eclipse cycle as well. This particular lunar eclipse is about not just being hopeful, but interrupting the people who are spewing some rhetoric of hate, or something that's just truly bad, and interrupting is starting to change the nature of the dialogue. And maybe there will be important people who will put themselves out there and have the power to try and shift the dialogue in the collective a little bit more. That's all possible, because that's the kind of thing you could see with Mars retrograde and the moon coming together. For example, empowered women, empowered women, or people who are more vulnerable, that have suddenly the power to speak or do something. That's very Mars retrograde with the moon at a lunar eclipse. For the marginalized people to be able to step forward and eclipse the status quo, eclipse the powers that be. So that's possible. On the other hand, we should also remember that it's not just totally ignorant. Some people believe that, understandably, some people believe that taking the position that says, look at all of this craziness going on. I see it on the left and I see it on the right, and I have no interest in it. I have no interest in getting myself enmeshed in it. I turn off the TV. I turn off the national sort of the constant polarizing of left and right, and I just don't want anything to do with it. I don't care. I don't care what happens. Whatever sort of a renouncing attitude is not all bad either. It's not just spiritual bypassing to say these are worldly dramas that have been going on since time immemorial, and in a new way, in a new shape, in a new form, will continue to go on day after day, month after month, year after year. There will always be oppressed people. There will always be fights between oppressors and victims. They'll take new forms, they'll take new shapes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not going to get lost in that. I'm not going to get identified with that. And there may be some healthy sense of renunciation that needs to happen as well, but only to the extent that we have gotten overly identified with, attached to, and lost in some level of drama. For example, how many times do I see people saying, I have to take a break from Facebook because I'm just sick of the drama. I'm sick of the fighting. I'm sick of the da-da-da. I have to turn off the news because I'm sick of it. And it's not, when people do that, it's not just because they're upset by what they're seeing on the side of their enemies. It's because they're stressed out from the entire dynamic. It's the entire thing. Everyone has had this happen in a relationship too. You're in a relationship with somebody and you're having a fight and you're going round and round and round and round and round, and your positions are totally predictable. You know each other's moves like you're perfect sparring partners. And at a certain point you look at each other and you're like, you want to be done with this? Yeah, okay, let's just be done because this is ridiculous. And my wife and I will do that because we know each other's arguments so well over a long period of time that we'll be like, well, this fight's really familiar. Like, you want to go out for dinner? Like, you want to go for a walk? What do you, like, yeah, this would be cool. Let's just change the subject. Contentment, one of my teachers likes to say, is dependent upon content. And it's not always a good thing to consume ourselves with the feeling that life is an eternal struggle against Republicans, or life is an eternal struggle against one oppressed person or group or thing over another, whether it's personal or societal. It's not always good to engage ourselves in those things, especially over time when we get so identified with it that it generates within us a spirit of constant vindictiveness and turbulence mentally and emotionally. And so one thing I also want to stick up for is that while I've said a lot about not renouncing things in a spirit of damnation, we want to figure out how to be in the world, sort of, but not of it. We want to figure out how to fight for what's right in the world and not be renouncing the world in some elitist, dissociative way. But we also, make no mistake about it, if we don't have some healthy awareness of how predictable, how cyclical, and how totally boring a lot of this stuff is, and how it's, at the end of the day, we're all going to die, and the solar system is going to die, and the sun is going to die. If we don't keep some of that perspective in mind, we can really get lost. And so the other thing that's really important about this eclipse is to remember that some healthy level of renouncement or detachment from the drama, just saying no more, I'm detaching from it, you may have to do that, and that's okay. So I think I've said about everything that was on my list to say today. I'll look up and see if there's any other questions before we go, but we'll say a little bit more about the eclipse next week as well. I just wanted to check in and do a little bit of preparing for this first quarter moon so people have some things to think about. Notice that folks who have mystical skills feel the full moon much earlier than the general population. Fluid energy meets fluid energy, maybe. Possibly a law like the kinetic permeability of prana. Prana is, I think, the word I was looking for earlier. Love your focus on the patience needed for the eternal being. Thanks for expressing it publicly. And that change doesn't usually happen quickly. It needs depth. You're right. Compassion isn't dismissive. It takes a lot of strength in the center. Very good. I'd also just add to that the thing about people who have mystical skills feel the full moon earlier. It's also very true, and I don't mean to be like a cynical jerk by saying this, but it's also very true that people who pay attention to anything regularly will have more awareness of it. Like people who pay attention to the weather will notice the weather more regularly. So I don't necessarily think that it's that some people have mystical skills. They're just not interested in astrology. And the other thing is that I think a lot of the times people who are interested in astrology, they also build their ego up because they feel like, oh, I can feel every transit. I'm so mystically in touch. I can feel every transit. But, I personally don't necessarily believe that that the transits are always something you can feel. I feel like sometimes you can think of transits like tarot cards. If I flip 5 tarot cards, I'm not going to look at them and go like, oh, I can really feel that card. Oh, that card's really affecting me. I think of the planets often like signs or omens. You can feel different kinds of tensions. That's true. And I do believe you can sometimes feel planetary transits. I also believe that. But I'm very skeptical of like building our egos on the platform of like how sensitive I am to the planetary transits, because then it's like all of a sudden we're all in some kind of competing Jedi academy, and it's just another thing to build the ego on. So I'm a little dismissive of it, but I'm only using what you said to make a larger point. So I still appreciate what you said a lot, Sharon. I don't mean to pick on you. Sharon Lee says, my neighbors gathered last night to complain about a group home where people with mental issues. They want to call the cops with every complaint. They want people who live there to stay out of sight so neighbors don't have to look at and listen to them. Yeah, there it is that get rid of it, cut it out, eliminate it, confront it, and just get rid of it. It's that intensity. Claire says, thank you. Needed to hear all of this today. You bet, Claire. Props to Minneapolis, hometown. Sharon Lee, I agree totally. I have detached about 90% from the drama. Yeah, at the end of the day, I do believe that there's a way of thinking about how we can be engaged without being without being angry. I know I recently even had a family member that I love very much and be like, you need to use your platform for more specifically political purposes. And I don't believe that's very radical. I really don't believe that's very unique or very radical. That's my personal, honest response. And I feel like it's more radical to be talking about compassion and just about 99% of the time. And I don't mean some kind of flimsy, dissociative, nice. I'm talking about paying attention and being intelligent, but not getting overly wrapped up and thinking that this material trip is going to end in utopia. I'm very realistic. My personal belief about the nature of time and reality is, for example, I personally believe that we're in the midst of the Kali Yuga right now, which means I don't think things are going to get better. And it does not mean that you can't try to do your best to maintain and improve a ship that's sinking. But I believe we have worse times ahead of us than better. And so my interest in compassion, to me, coming from that perspective, is rooted in what feels to me like a very radical position. Because one could, given a more pessimistic outlook on the future, given the position that I take, which is that things are going to get worse before they get better, one could easily abandon hope, and one could easily abandon patience, and one could easily not remember the larger scope of things. So to me, compassion is a very radical position, but there's room for lots of positions. That's why there's lots of astrology YouTube channels. So, all right. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll look forward to talking more about the eclipse with all of you guys probably next week sometime. If the baby doesn't arrive, like whenever, tomorrow. Okay. Take care, guys. Bye.